Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show.
Me better, yeah.
Hello, listeners. This is Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they join me on their show. I'm joined by Dean Rozell. Now, if you know, you've been following, I've been doing a Dean mini-series. Once I get one, I got to go through all of them like Pokemon, you know what I'm saying? Got to catch them all. And so I've been using this podcast to understand more closely the different nuances of the colleges here at George Mason, the different experiences of the deans and the uniqueness that they have in regards to their career journey and the academic challenges that they may face per college. But before we get into this, Mark, can you give the listeners a little background on who you are?
Sure. Happy to do it, Philip, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Mark Rozell, and I serve as the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University. I am a political scientist by training, so I had a long career as a professor of political science and professor of public policy before becoming an academic dean 11 years ago. So I came to George Mason University, by the way, 20 years ago with no intention of ever getting into academic administration, actually, and was absolutely happy with my career as professor and intended it always to be that way. But as circumstances unexpectedly had it, there was a need for someone to step into a role temporarily, and temporarily became long-term, actually. So I guess there's a bit of a story there, but it's largely a happy one, actually. I'm quite pleased with the work I'm doing at George Mason. I feel like I have the opportunity to build something, since the Schar School is a relatively new public policy and government school in the nation's capital region. So it's in the spirit of the name of your podcast, it's all upbeat and very positive.
I love it. You know, so let's go back, it was the origin story. As a kid, growing up, were you always interested in politics? Were you always, looking at the election night and doing your own electoral college board? Or take us back to your childhood and those early experiences with government.
Yeah. So I was a bit of a nerd in that way. You pegged me absolutely right. I love baseball and I love politics, and I knew statistics backwards, forwards, every way possible about both. Even as early as the Nixon campaigns when I was a child, I was just really drawn to following electoral politics and the presidency and how government works. So I did quite well in school in the social studies oriented classes, history and government and the like, and wasn't terribly good at math. So I think my career path was kind of set at an early stage of life, and I'm glad I stuck with it and didn't take some of the advice that others gave me about what I should do with my life, because, hey, it's worked out pretty well.
And so, going to college, did you said political science, was that like you went to a college and you said, I want to study this?
Yes, I did. So coming out of high school, I wasn't exactly sure my career path, although I knew I wanted to get into government politics from a sort of academical study standpoint as opposed to a practitioner. And I thought I'd go teach in my high school or something like that, because that's all I knew. And I ended up going to a small liberal arts college in upstate New York, being a native of the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. And it was named for President Eisenhower. So I thought, that's good. That's about politics too. And I was a political science major, loaded up on courses in political science. And actually, people told me, okay, you came from working class background, you got a chance to get an education, go to law school, make money. Go to law school, make money. And so I thought I was on this path that I had to study public law, constitutional law, judicial process, go to law school. But boy, I really love what my professors are doing. And wouldn't that be an absolutely wonderful career to have. I wish I could be like them. Um, so the short of the story is I took both the LSATs and the GREs thinking, okay, I'm going to look both ways here. People are saying go to law school. And when I didn't do well on the law school admission test, my heart was just not in it. It was just not there, and my test score reflected that. And I was happy,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. So, it doesn't work for everybody when you say follow your heart, but it does work for a lot of people in this world. And so I ended up applying to graduate schools for political science doctoral programs, and I have never regretted any of it.
It's funny is I'm a history major from undergrad, and that was like the big thing was like if you're a history major, a lot of history majors go into law. And
Yep.
I took a look at the LSAT like just prep book, and I didn't even crack it. And I was like, no, that's not for me. Like I didn't even take the test, but my heart wasn't in it. But I loved history, and so I kind of identify with that story.
Yeah.
So while you were in school, like you said, you're studying political science, but also like being a practitioner. Were you involved in student government or involved in student leadership while you were in undergrad?
Yeah, I was. We had a political science club, for example. There was a student senate. Um, I was advocating for things like better food in the cafeteria.
Yeah, yeah.
But hey, you get your political chops,
Mhm.
starting at the ground level. Actually, even in high school, when I was a high school senior, I found out about a study in Washington program. And
Mhm.
so it was called the Washington Workshops. And, I saw some literature about this and I thought, oh, 1 week in Washington, D.C., and you go to the Capitol and you go to the White House and you meet these speakers. And wow, that would be really exciting. Oh, my, this is expensive.
Yeah.
Uh, so I just started writing letters to local community and civic organizations saying, can you support, a local kid to go to Washington for a week? And it was like American Legion and Kiwanis Club and the local chamber, and they were all fronting me, $50, $100. I was amazed how many were willing to, because I took the initiative, send me a check.
Yeah.
And then what I did is I did the program and I wrote up a little report about it, and I went to their monthly meetings to tell them, all the good they did by supporting me to do this program. Um, so that was kind of a formative experience for me. And then there was a follow up that the same organization had where you can go to Washington for 3 weeks,
More
and
money.
yeah, we have more money. So I did it again. We weren't rich, but I was able to get support to do this. But it was a 3 credit college course, and I thought, wow, I'm doing this as a senior in high school. I'm getting college credits. And the major component of the program was an internship with a member of Congress.
Oh, wow.
So my local member of Congress was Ben Gilman, kind of a progressive New York Republican. There were moderate and progressive Republicans back in that era.
Yeah.
And to me, it wasn't like I'm a partisan. I just wanted to go with my local Congress member because that's who
Mhm.
I knew. Um, and had a wonderful experience for 3 weeks, just learning the workings of Capitol Hill, and that just set me on my path that I'm going to study political science when I go to college, because that 3 week program, I was just excited about it every single day, getting up and going to Capitol Hill and feeling kind of big about it, that I'm a high school senior and I'm, helping to write speeches and, respond to mail and things like that.
I love it. No, I mean, this is my brain going randomly. Did you have to dress up in a suit every day? And, was that new for you as a high school kid wearing a suit in DC?
It was, yeah. My parents took me shopping just to, it probably wouldn't look very fashionable today because it was kind of a polyester tan suit.
Yeah.
I was ahead of time, right? Remember Obama had a tan suit and people went.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go, trendsetter. And so, and one of the things think about too, that initiative that you take, did you on your own initiative say, I'm going to come to your meeting and report out, or did they ask for that?
Both actually, but I wanted to do that. I felt like you're giving me money, and that was a big deal. And I should I wrote letters thanking them.
Yeah.
Like I got postcards from Washington. And whoever the director was, hey, I'm in Washington now. Thank you so much. no email back in those days. So
Yeah.
buy a postcard, get a stamp, handwrite a note and send it, just to show my appreciation, which I really did appreciate. That was a big deal.
And so thinking about this too, as an academic, were you always gravitated to reading and writing and particularly about this subject? And when you did these reports, was that like something that like you felt natural, like writing about politics, writing about what you're doing? Did that come natural to you, from high school? As I think I'm not the STEM person. Math was always a struggle, but did you feel like that came naturally to you?
That's what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And I won't say it came naturally. The desire came naturally. The ability took a lot of work. So one of the great advantages to me, having gone to a small liberal arts college as I did, very labor intensive for the professors, small classes, right? A lot of guidance, and I needed it at that point in my life. One thing I did is I would go to my professor and say, okay, you gave me this writing assignment. Do you mind if I write a rough draft and get it to you a week ahead of time? And,
Mhm.
will you give me some feedback? No one ever said no. Uh,
Yeah.
no one ever said no to me, and I would just, it's the old advice, right? If you want to write well, write and rewrite and rewrite. And I knew I needed help, and that's what I did. Um, so I started writing pieces for the school newspaper and, things like that to continue to hone my writing skills and, write commentary about contemporary political issues because that's what I got all excited about. So I wanted to sort of go beyond just what I was learning in the class and try to apply it and stoke some student interest, among my friends and others about a variety of public policy government issues.
Now, if you mind me asking, when were you going to college?
I don't mind you asking me at all. So I did the traditional 4-year residential college thing, 1978 to 1982.
Okay, so in that realm, thinking about uh, 78 to 82, what was the student political involvement, and how would you compare that to today? Like I think what I'm learning, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, which is the first historically Black fraternity,
Mhm.
and we're just trying to talk about, there's always been historically the apathy or to government participation by young people, 18 to 24, and always that voting gap. So what was it like during when you were in college? Was it like, were students more involved in the political sphere when you were in college?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of activism on our campus. It was a very small liberal arts college in a rural area of upstate New York, but students were very engaged about policy issues. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'd sit in the school cafeteria. We didn't have food choices like in the Johnson Center those days, right? You got what they fed you that day. And, there was a common place where all the students went around the same time to get their meals. And yeah, there were those folks who would say, "Oh, they're talking politics again," and walk away. And I didn't care. I was with my group of friends, and we'd carry on these long discussions about, what's going on in the news and what we were learning in our classes and so on. And but keep in mind too, right? We're just coming out of a period of time in which the United States was
Mhm.
engaged in a very controversial war in Southeast Asia, and
Mhm.
feelings were running quite intensified still in the late 1970s about the US's involvement having been so ill-advised. And, the result was terrible for so many people, and so many discussions about America's role in the world centered around that experience. And,
Mhm.
many of us had older siblings who, either went to the war or, went to college. And there was that issue too, right? About
Mhm.
people having the college exemption. Then you had the Iran hostage crisis, 1979, and then this guy
Mhm.
Reagan runs for president in
Yes.
1980. And people don't know that today, but there were a lot of folks who looked at Reagan as kind of a political extremist too far to the right, and at that time. And Carter was not a terribly popular president, and the 80 campaign just stoked an intensified interest in what was going to happen to the country given one result or the other. Is this starting to sound familiar, by the way?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so yeah.
So I mean, so you're saying, and I see this too, right? Like, I ain't gonna lie, I was a history major in high school, and when I made sure that it felt like a big deal to me when I was 18. I remember my first national election was in 2004. I think that's Bush Kerry.
Yep.
And I don't know, I just felt like you had to do it. And so I didn't read as much. I don't think this information was as readily available, but there was a innate, even as a young person, there was an innate responsibility to go to my local elementary school. Because I was in Bowie State in Maryland,
Uh-huh.
but I grew up here in Mount Vernon, and I knew it was such a big deal that I came back home and did it at the elementary school, and I felt like there's more fervor around that, but I feel like that's not the same. Why do you think that young people feeling of engagement is not the same? Do you think we're just inundated with too much information, or it just kind of jaded? But what are your thoughts as someone that studied political science about the young people's engagement?
Yeah. It's a very key issue because I am one of those who believes that the next generation really needs to step up, that things have gotten way off course in this country in terms of our political dynamics, how we engage with each other, the lack of civility that's being shown on Capitol Hill, which, I told you my story, right? I was a 17, 18-year-old going to
Mhm.
Capitol Hill, and I was just enthralled by the experience about how Democrats, Republicans spoke so respectfully to each other and
Mhm.
worked together on problems, right? I saw that up front. And before that, I had heard the intensified rhetoric that would be amplified by media, but seeing how things work. So, I think students today see what's going
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
Um, we've even talked about this in the Schar school, we're a public policy government school, and we've had some challenges with enrollments the past few years. And people come to me and say that's just a larger secular trend. Young people are getting turned off by politics and government. They're seeing what's in the media these days. They're seeing how political leaders are behaving toward each other. But also, in addition to that, and I talk to a lot of young folks about these things, okay?
Mhm.
There's a feeling of almost being left behind as a
Yeah.
generation, right? Which I didn't feel that. I felt like, the world is full of possibilities. And if
Mhm.
you apply yourself, you're going to get there. Things are going to work out. But wow, is it discouraging to hear so many young people say, you know, the system's kind of rigged against our generation. I'll never be able to afford a mortgage.
Mhm.
I had these career aspirations, but look at the way that companies are just laying off people and relying on AI. And
Mhm.
what's going to be there for me? And politics can't solve any of this. So I work hard to try to convince um, my students and others that look, you matter.
Mhm.
You can take charge here and be a part of a generation that gets things back on track. If you can identify the problem, and that's what you're telling me you're doing, right? You can
Mhm.
think about, okay, what do we do from here? Giving up is not an option. Disengaging should not be an option. But I'll tell you one other thing. I am grateful, and a lot of people want to understand this thing that I did not grow up in a I'm holding an iPhone, okay?
Yeah.
Since this is not visual, and you see me doing this right now.
Mhm.
Um, I'm really grateful I grew up as a young person where I went outside and played with my friends, and we played board
Mhm.
games, and we read books, and we talked to each other about them. And the stimulation I got was interpersonal. It was
Yeah.
it was with people. Um, so I think there's something also going on generationally that's, as rising levels of anxieties and depression, and I think it's all connected to a lot of what's going on with social media and how people are absorbing information these days.
Excellent. And thank you. Like, yeah, I'm getting my PhD in communication, and I'm thinking about like I said, now going back to that 18-year-old, it just didn't feel like the world was so overwhelming like that, right? You
Yep.
watch a few news shows or whatever, but it just didn't feel like I was flooded with information and anxiety about it. But one thing you thought of, you shot up, it was like that you brought up was that the lack of agency that young people feel. And when I'm thinking about this, I'm in the middle. I call myself the middle child, middle child generation, But what I've noticed is that there's still the gatekeeping of leadership. Like most of political senior leadership are very old, without being said. And so are they making room for, like just what it is, the two people running for president or what, 70 plus, right?
Yep.
And so how does this really encourage young people to participate when they're like, you got to be older? And I'll say this because I was on a call with a state delegate, and she was in her late 20s, and she was like, I'm in the state government, and we get a little stipend, but I got to rely on money because I can't afford this as my full-time job. And so they said, she's like, I want to be involved at the state level, but maybe, so as you said, the system is not rigged for me to participate because I don't have enough money for a 9 to 5.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't think we treat a lot of people in the public sector very well in this country, whether it's educators, people who want to go into public life and serve, right? You're not going to make a lot of money doing it. But you should be able to have a sustainable quality of life while doing your public service. And we make it very difficult for people like the person you're describing to, make various sacrifices in order to serve the greater public good. So, I mean, even at higher levels of government too, where, the salary of members of Congress might sound impressive to the average American, but when you consider the cost of living in DC and for many people having 2 residences and and what they can be doing otherwise with their time and making a lot more money, and then you just end up getting a class of people who are independently wealthy and the money doesn't really matter to them, and you're not getting this broad segment of American population from different economic spheres and backgrounds, right? And so, I get it that young people look at political leadership and they see candidates for president 77 and 81 years of age. What's in it for me? When's the next generation going to have an opportunity to have a leadership role? And maybe some people need to know when it's time. Maybe that's part of the issue too. And but also there are just certain dynamics to how we nominate candidates for political office and where the money flows, and like that explains a lot of why things just seem kind of stuck the way that they are. So that gets into a lot of complicated issues, reforms and the like.
And also, just to reframe it back, like the positive, right? Like one thing that I love about the university is then on the flip side, we do have an opportunity to see those next generation leaders. Like so many students, I'm like super impressed by Schar students that are like, wow, this person's only 18 years old and they're already part of Mason lobbies and they're doing all kinds of great things.
Yeah.
So maybe how did you come to Mason? How did your Mason journey start?
That also happened unexpectedly for me. So let me see, 2003, I'm professor of politics and department chair of politics at Catholic University of America in Washington. And happily so, having a good career at CUA. Had no intention of ever moving on. But I got a phone call one day from a now colleague who said to me, there's a lot of talk about you over here. And I resisted the calls thinking, I'm not applying for jobs. I'm happy where I am. And he was persistent. I give him credit for being persistent. And at one point he said, hey, let's not talk about job anymore. Why don't you just come over and do a presentation and meet people? You've got a lot of friends here, fellow political scientists. I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. And I came, and then I thought, wow, this is a good place. And then we started having more discussions. So again, it's the best way to get a job, actually. To have somebody call you up and say, we think the work you're doing is something that's really compatible with what we have and what we need. And we think you'd be a great fit. But, there was no guarantee, of course. I still had to go through a process at that point after expressing an interest. But it all worked out, and yeah, it was the best career move ever for me.
So you said the Schar School is relatively young,
Yes.
right? What was the formation of that and the uniqueness of that?
Okay, I
information?
will try to be brief on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I came in 2004 in what was called the School of Public Policy. So the School of Public Policy was a graduate professional school of George Mason, exclusively in Arlington,
Mhm.
and it was mostly night classes, working professionals taking classes part-time, getting master's degrees, and we had a couple PhD programs too, in fields of public policy, international affairs, and the like. And then what was puzzling to me is that, well, then you also had on the Fairfax campus a department of um, public and international affairs, it was called, but it was basically the equivalent of a political science department, right? In a College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Um, it struck me as kind of an odd thing that we didn't really intersect with each other or work together, and yet we were close cousins of each other in terms of academic fields and the work that we do. And a lot of this gets boring to your audience about, how budgets are done at universities and
Yeah.
why if I'm located over here, I can't teach over there, kind of thing, which all needs to be fixed and nobody's figured it out. But there was talk for a number of years, and apparently even before I came to Mason, there had been efforts to try to bring these two units together. But there was a breakthrough when Angel Cabrera was president. I unexpectedly became the acting dean of the public policy school. There's another long story. I won't tell you there how that happened. But Angel Cabrera, the president of Mason at the time, called me and said, let's take this talk seriously about a merger. So we built a committee of faculty from the two what are now legacy units of the Schar School, and it was a year of negotiating all of the conditions of what a merger would look like, and we ended up doing it. It worked, and it was interesting. Here's a leadership lesson, by the way.
Yes.
I was a novice leader. I was an acting dean. I thought I was going right back to faculty in 1 year, and I got this heady responsibility. And I said to Angel, "You're president. You want a merger? Do it." And he said, "Yeah, I have the authority to do it, but I'm not going to do it. The people who are going to merge are going to have to work together throughout their careers. They have to want this, and they have to build it. So he said, I'm not going to dictate anything. It's going to have to be the principals themselves who create it because they want it, and that's the only way it's going to work." And he was absolutely right. So we even had faculty votes, whether to do the merger as a last step, which worked out. And then within a year, I was in discussions with real estate developer Dwight Schar, who has always been a big supporter of the Northern Virginia community. You may have seen some news stories recently about the multi-million-dollar gifts he gave to a Nova Health Center in Fairfax. And so that resulted in a naming gift for what then became the Schar School. So we got the merger, we got the naming gift, we renamed the school in honor of our major benefactor.
That's amazing. One thing I'm thinking about, we're uniquely, right? Like, I think that if I was, I've talked to some students from out of state, right? And like when they say, "Hey, I want to get interested in politics, I just need to be in the DMV." But then, they have all these schools they can choose, Georgetown, all these other schools, but they uniquely pick us. And that, I don't know why would you think, what makes this unique? Why we're like outside the bubble, but we're not in, your GW can walk to the White House, you know what I'm saying? So like, what makes us unique and I think attractive to students interested in studying government?
Yeah, well, we do take advantage, right, of our location being not just in Fairfax, but also Arlington. And I'm talking the Schar School here.
Yeah.
We're not on a third campus or Korea. And most of our graduate professional programs are in Arlington. So we're right off the Virginia Square Metro line. I tell people it's actually easier to get to downtown DC from our campus than if you were at American University, for example, no metro on campus there.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I have this thing called Lunch with the Dean, where I get together with a group of undergraduate students several times a semester at the Globe dining room. Like maybe 6, 8, 10 of us sit around the table and talk for an hour and a quarter. And I get a lot of out-of-state students who tell exactly the same what you're hearing, that they came here to study government politics because of our location, but also because they took the time to look at the regional universities throughout the DC area, and they really liked what we had to offer in the Schar School. And I think part of that is the merger itself, right? That we brought together the traditional liberal arts unit in what typically is called political science with the graduate professional, whereas at other universities, they're completely separated from each other like we used to be, and they don't work together like we used to be as well. And students now just have such a wide range of options that they can be doing, bachelor, advanced master's degree programs in different fields, right? Taking courses in Arlington, and we have the shuttle to Arlington, and and then they get involved in things going on in the Washington community. Um, and then we have some distinctive programs such as international security and law at the undergraduate level and international security at the master's level. So we have some distinguishing features that separate us from, what some of our regional competitors are doing. So I think students take a look and they see this is the place to be. Yeah, and some will take a look and say GW is the place to be, and that's fine. That it's a fine school and they do good work in our field too. But there's enough room for all of us in the DC region to do politics and government studies.
Definitely get that. I'm a Mason alum, so I got a bias.
Me
Positive
too.
Filter listeners, I got a bias. But also, do you believe that being a younger school, and I guess we kind of have that chip on our shoulder, the flexibility to be a little bit more innovative? I don't know. That's just the vibe I get. Like, we're not so like old money, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And you asked me my story coming to Mason, and that's the thing I noticed about the institution that made me excited about wanting to be here. So I was at a place where I was perfectly happy and doing, I thought, quite well professionally. But there were times when the default answer, when a faculty member, wanted to do something a little bit creative, was no. And I came to Mason and I heard a lot of yes.
Yeah,
Like, be creative, go out and build things. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but let's see if we can get you what you need to make it work. And I just found that exciting about the place. There's a can-do attitude about Mason that, we do a lot more with less. We have to scrape by sometimes, but I think that motivates people. I think there's a lot of people who, buy into that spirit of the place. That okay, we don't quite have the resources of some of our competitor universities in the region, but we can just be a little bit more creative and try a little harder and build things, and we can succeed and do even better than they're doing with less. I find that kind of an exciting, uplifting, positive attitude to have institutionally, and that's kind of infectious around much of Mason, I find.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm smiling because I feel like that's just like the grit. The word grit just comes to my mind, and just resiliency. I don't know, just kind of that chip on your shoulder. I feel like I get that all the time.
Yep.
Now, you were talking about like back in the 80s, early 80s, the political discourse was different, and having discussions. And I can imagine being the dean of a government school, it could be difficult. So how do you in the school navigate freedom of expression and civil discourse, but civility still maintained in there, and allowing students of different ideologies to still have their different viewpoints, but in respectful ways?
Right. So this is something I feel very strongly about, and what I say to colleagues and what I say to students. I don't care if you're a good Democrat or a good Republican, a good conservative or a good liberal. I really just care if you're a good scholar or a good student. And we all come together and we work on public policy, government issues and problems. We do it at the intersection of multidisciplines in the Schar School. We're not just a one discipline unit. And we do it from different perspectives respectfully. And I convey that message when I meet students all the time, that that's who we are. And I think we've done quite well in terms of our public presentation of what the Schar School is. We're kind of semi-famous for the amount of media coverage we get. Our scholars get. And look, reporters are not calling people for a hyper-partisan, controversialist type statement on an issue. They're calling faculty members for expertise to guide them on a story. And you got to play it straight as much as possible. So I think what we do is we signal that, and we live it and show that's the way to be. I've heard remarkably few issues about lack of civility, among students in the Schar School. I would hear about it, that people would come to me and tell me that these terrible things are happening, and I'm not getting that, which I'm very, students are passionate, they have their opinions, and I meet with students and they're eager to speak up about different issues, and I encourage that, of course. But I don't see it going to the next level where people are actively disrespecting each other. I'm sure I'm missing some things that are going on here and there, but I'm just saying on the whole, right? Look, if it was really bad, you'd see news stories about us all the time. The way that you have seen news stories the past several months about some other institutions around the United States. We're right in a major media hub, and it would get as much or more attention than some other places. So I think Mason is a place that signals the importance of civility and respect for different points of view and freedom of expression. We get awards for that. And I think if you set the example, people will follow.
Yeah. So what, I'm thinking about this, like if I was a freshman or just someone, and you were my professor and we're about to have a class, what would be some of the ground rules to set for respectful dialogue around politics?
Sure. So I'm not teaching now, but I taught for about 30 years.
Yeah.
I became an academic administrator, so I'm not that far away from it. And I taught undergraduates for years, and then ended up mostly teaching graduate students. But I would walk into a classroom and say, "This is a class in, let's say, Congress or American government politics, intro class, whatever, political parties and elections. People are going to have strong feelings, and that's natural. I will never tell anybody, check your partisanship at the door. You have opinions, make sure you substantiate them, right? Don't just give me unsubstantiated personal opinions without any grounding in some facts, some analysis. We can all come together here and have different viewpoints, but we're going to do it respectfully." And students hear the message, and I will say that on the first day of class, that I'm not afraid of people speaking their views, but make sure you ground your views in facts and analysis that can be substantiated, and we can learn from each other. And then I tell students also, take my advice on this, and I tell them I do this. Don't just turn on the cable news station that confirms everything you believe to be true. Turn on the one that's going to challenge you the most and make you wonder about your own views and whether your views can withstand, a kind of scrutiny and different analysis coming from a different viewpoint. Go back and forth between the two. Don't just situate yourself in one place and say, I'm going to follow this news program because I like their opinion. And I encourage people, do the old-fashioned thing, read online, of course, a daily mainstream news source, BBC, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, whatever. And let's talk about it.
I love it. And then one of the things I'm thinking about too is uh, attack the argument, not the person.
Yes.
Right? Like, I don't know what was the thing, like the different, was it the different fallacies of debate, right? I can't remember. There's different ones where it's like, talk about no, not the person. Some people try to discredit people rather than use what you said, facts. And there's a very logical, I think, logical standard to discourse that makes logical sense in arguments. Almost like a stoic, you have to have like a stoic mindset in that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a wonderful way to put it, right? Attack the argument, not the person. Um, and that should not be hard to do. People shouldn't take personally that the person next to them disagrees on an issue. So I have my own views, and because I'm professor and dean, I don't express them openly because I don't want it to have a chilling effect on colleagues or students. But the voting booth is a nice place to express myself. But can I tell you how many friends I have who cancel my vote in elections? I know that they do,
Yeah.
and it's okay. We're good friends. So I even tell students, make an extra effort to reach out to the people who disagree with you and sit down with them. Have lunch together, have coffee together and talk it through, right? Make a pledge to each other that you're going to respect each other's viewpoint. You're not going to say anything about, that's, you're wrong, you're stupid or whatever. And you'll be amazed how much you might like that other person, even though you have different views about politics. And one thing that's very discouraging about America right now is just how much people are choosing to isolate themselves in like-minded communities and not reach out to people who they disagree with, but to actively avoid them and in some cases just outright demonize them. It's a terrible thing that's happening. And, a lot of that's just being amplified, I think, by social media and, partisan programming on the cable networks and the like.
Now, one of the things I thought about too was that the burden of leadership. So you are a leader, you have your own opinion. Has that been hard to navigate? Like you're a subject matter expert in politics, but you just said it. You have to understand that you are influential on the views of students. So you have to kind of have those boundaries. Is that something that you learned early on through your professorship, or it was more grounded in becoming a dean?
Yeah, I had to learn that early on. And it's a good lesson, I think, to learn because what you don't want to have is a well-known point of view that students feel I got to spit back that viewpoint on the test or I won't get a good grade. I mean, that does exist, I've heard students say about a particular professor who has a strong viewpoint on something, I better align my views with his or her views because otherwise my grade will suffer. Well, that's a terrible thing to have to carry as a student, right? So I've always, when I taught, I always went out of my way to assure my students that, look, we're human beings. We have opinions. It's natural. I have opinions. I come to the classroom. I studiously try to avoid in any way signaling, how I vote or, my views on the issues. But there are going to be times when it comes out because, it's in here. I'm pointing to my head. I'm sorry. It's, it's there and and just be mindful that, this is what we all do, but I give you my word. Whatever your viewpoint, I'm going to respect you. As long as you are doing your work as a student and substantiating your views in a way that's, again, fact and analysis based.
Yeah, I think that's just also back to my counseling 101. We had to be challenged a lot to say like, and they do all these we do all these like, if you had a client that had totally different views from you, how do you still serve that person, or how do you set boundaries, or I guess also understand when to step out because that there's too much transference. But I can see that existing a lot in the political space as well, not just the mental health space. About we bring our full selves to instruction, but we also have to make sure that we're supporting and fostering dialogue.
That's right. Yeah, it's important to make the other person feel comfortable, right? And students can be easily intimidated by professors and, university leaders. And it's sometimes easy for those of us in those positions to kind of forget a little bit about our position vis-a-vis the students and how they perceive us.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great. This is the part of the show where I call it shot for shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first, so I go first.
Oh, you go first and I'll think of my question. I don't have one off the top of my head, but I think it's a nice idea.
So I like the origin story stuff. What was some early books or things you read that really got you interested in government? Literature that you read that was like, this is it. I love reading this.
So, having come of age during the period of Nixon, Ford, right? The US war in Vietnam and the like. The popular books that were coming out at the time by, the Woodward and Bernstein book, right? Ran to the bookstore and got that immediately, was excited when the movie came out. The memoirs of different political leaders. To me, that's what I knew. I didn't know much. I didn't know anything about scholarly works at those times.
Mm-hmm.
But I had an older brother who was a fanatical reader of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's works, and he would give me the books that he was reading. And I just, even in high school, I was just, it was kind of opening up my, sense of there's a whole world out there, and so little mentorship from an older sibling, and he would pass books on to me. He was into Eastern religions. He was in college. He was 10 years older than me. And he knew I was interested in politics, and he would pass books to me and the like. And again, I'm happy I didn't grow up with one of these things to distract me. I'm holding the iPhone again. It was books, newspapers, weekly magazines. I even got magazines of opinion. I at one point I was reading Mother Jones and National Review.
Yeah, I love it.
I wanted to see both points of view.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, what's your question for me?
Wow. So, what gets you excited every day about what you're doing in your job? What gets you up in the morning and you feel, I am really looking forward to this thing that I'm going to be doing today?
I'll be honest. The people. I've been totally, I'm an extrovert, but I'll call myself the unofficial Mayor Mason, just, getting to know people. But I just think that the opportunities for community and just knowing people and connecting with people in different spaces gets me excited to actually come here. I went here and I think a yearning. I was always that kid. I have this quick story where my teacher, when I was a kid, my teacher always gave me good, even before we had A, B, and C, we had like, outstanding, needs status. And she would say, Philip's bright, Philip's smart, but he talks too much in class and he talks to everybody. and I remember one time in third grade, I remember this specific story. She moved me around the classroom. And I think I remember I told her one day, I was like, it doesn't matter where you're going to move me. I'm going to talk to the neighbor next door. And I think that's what excites me about this place is that there's just the opportunity to connect with people, connect with you, and learn. I learned so much from people. And the fact that I'm in a educational space with so many great thinkers and I just feel like I get smarter just being here and learning. And so I think that gets me excited. I definitely love hybrid work. I definitely need those days at home, but also I am happy that I have a actual community, a physical community to come to connect with people. So that's what gets me excited every day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great. Yeah, I hear you. I feel the same way. I get up in the morning, I'm excited about what I'm doing that day. And if you can feel that way about your job, wow, you're winning the game of life in a big way.
Yeah. Now, this is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. You get to show love to anyone you want to show love to. And then plugs, these are things that I'll put in the show notes. For all these, I've been putting the website of the various colleges, but anything else that you want to highlight. So the stage is set for you. Shout outs and plugs.
Okay. Shout outs to my colleagues who make this such a pleasurable experience to be able to do the job that I'm doing and make me want to keep doing what I'm doing. There are plenty of people in my age cohort who are thinking about the next stage of life, and that's not even a thought for a second in my mind. So, thank you to the leadership of Mason, and thank you to my colleagues for making this place a place where I want to come back to every day, and do this work that I'm excited about. And shout out to my kids and my wife who make everything complete. How's that?
Awesome. And then plugs, anything you want the listeners to be aware of, your school or any things that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of exciting things going on in the Schar School. Students, look around at the courses. Our faculty are fantastic. I read the reviews of students in our courses, and I'm always very gratified at how well our faculty are liked and respected, and how good an education the students feel that they're getting at Mason. So there's a lot of good going on there. We've got a lot of things that sort of expand our identity publicly, like a poll we do with the Washington Post and some centers that are very high profile. So it's a multifaceted thing, leading a public policy government school in the Washington, D.C. region. And that's what makes it exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Dean. This has been a great episode. Positive Filter listeners, please check out everything that's going on at Mason and particularly the Schar School. As you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all his advocacy against food insecurity. Also, if you're a part of the Mason Nation, please consider sending another Patriot a Pats for Patriots that sends them an e-card, something nice just to uplift their day. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a participant, and have a good day. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.